What if the origin story you memorized in school,
the one every textbook and documentary repeated for decades, was not just slightly off, but fundamentally broken at its core? The neat little diagram with a single dot in Africa and arrows spreading outward to every corner of the globe just shattered under the weight of evidence that was hiding inside your own cells this entire time. Before we tear that old story apart and rebuild it from scratch, I need you to do something that takes less than 3 seconds.
Before we tear that old story apart and rebuild it from scratch,
I need you to do something that takes less than 3 seconds. Tap the like button if you believe real science should always override comfortable myths, hit subscribe so you never miss a single upload, and share this video with one person in your life who still thinks human evolution was a straight line from apes to us. You would be shocked how many people are walking around with a version of history that scientists themselves no longer accept. Now let us travel back to the version of events most of us absorbed without questioning it. For a very long time, the dominant explanation for how modern humans appeared, most of us absorbed without questioning it. For a very long time, the dominant explanation for how modern humans appeared
on this planet was almost beautiful in its simplicity.
The idea went something like this. Somewhere on the African continent, a single, relatively small group of early humans evolved the specific physical and mental traits that made them recognizably modern. They developed larger brains, more complex language, more sophisticated tools, and eventually they looked and behaved enough like us that scientists classified them as Homo sapiens. Over time, descendants of that one founding group migrated outward, crossing deserts, coastlines, and mountain ranges.
Until they populated every habitable region on Earth.
Everyone alive today, from the frozen villages of northern Scandinavia to the highland communities of Peru to the bustling cities of Southeast Asia, supposedly traces their ancestry back to that one original population. This framework was known as the recent African origin model, and it dominated the field of human evolution for decades. It gave museum curators a clean narrative to build exhibits around. It gave documentary filmmakers a straightforward script to narrate over sweeping aerial shots of the African savanna. It gave biology teachers a single paragraph they could write on a whiteboard and feel confident they had covered the essentials. One origin point, one migration event, one tidy story that wrapped up neatly. But nature has never been particularly interested in tidy stories. And the deeper researchers looked, the more problems began surfacing in that seemingly airtight narrative. The biggest issue was always the fossil record itself, and understanding why requires a brief detour into just how extraordinarily unlikely fossilization actually is. For a bone to survive hundreds of thousands of years and eventually end up in a museum drawer, an almost miraculous combination of circumstances has to align perfectly. The organism has to die in exactly the right location. The body has to be buried rapidly in sediment with the correct chemical composition to slow decomposition. The climate has to remain stable enough to prevent the burial site from being washed away or baked into dust. And then that buried remains has to sit completely undisturbed through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, floods, earthquakes, and
countless generations of animals burrowing through the soil above it.
The overwhelming majority of early humans who ever lived and died left behind absolutely nothing. Their bones dissolved, their teeth disintegrated, their entire physical existence vanished without leaving a single trace that future scientists could dig up and study. So when researchers built their grand theories about human origins using fossils, they were essentially trying to reconstruct a full-length feature film from 4 or 5 random frames pulled from completely different reels. Their entire physical existence vanished without leaving a single trace that future scientists could dig up and study. So when researchers built their grand theories about human origins using fossils,
they were essentially trying to reconstruct a full-length feature film
from 4 or 5 random frames pulled from completely different reels.
The picture they assembled was not necessarily wrong in every single detail,
but it was missing so much context and so many crucial scenes that the overall narrative ended up being deeply misleading in ways nobody had the tools to detect at the time. This is where the real revolution began, and it happened far more quietly than most people realize. Instead of continuing to rely on the scattered fragments of bone that happened to survive the centuries, a team of geneticists decided to tap into a source of information that was infinitely more abundant, far more detailed, in ways nobody had the tools to detect at the time. This is where the real revolution began, and it happened far more quietly than most people realize. Instead of continuing to rely on the scattered fragments of bone
that happened to survive the centuries,
a team of geneticists decided to tap into a source of information that was infinitely more abundant, far more detailed, and brutally honest about what actually occurred in the deep past. They turned to the DNA of living human beings. The reasoning behind this shift was both elegant and powerful. Every single person alive on this planet right now carries inside their cells a compressed historical archive of their ancestry stretching back thousands upon thousands of generations. That archive is written in the universal language of genetic code, and it does not require any special geological luck to survive. It passes from parent to child, generation after generation,
regardless of whether the bones of those ancestors ever fossilized or simply decomposed and returned to the earth like almost everything organic.
By collecting DNA samples from many different populations across Africa and comparing them against one another using advanced computational tools, researchers could effectively read the invisible footprints
that ancient humans left behind in the bodies of their living descendants.
And those footprints told a radically different story from the one that had been carved into stone and printed in textbooks for decades. The breakthrough research came from a collaboration between geneticists at the University of California, Davis, and researchers at McGill University. What made their work stand out was not merely the advanced technology, but the specific populations they chose to study and the specific questions they dared to ask. They focused heavily on the Nama people of southern Africa, a community that carries some of the most ancient and genetically diverse lineages found anywhere on the planet today. The Nama are not simply another data point in a large genetic survey. And genetically diverse lineages found anywhere on the planet today. The Nama are not simply another data point in a large genetic survey.
Their DNA functions almost like a living time capsule,
preserving molecular signals from deep in the human past that have been diluted, overwritten, or completely erased in most other populations. The researchers collected saliva samples from dozens of Nama individuals over the course of several years, sequenced 44 complete genomes, and then fed that data into sophisticated statistical models specifically designed to test competing theories about early human populations. If you are still here watching this, that already tells me something important about you.
You are the kind of person who values uncomfortable truth over comfortable fiction,
and that is exactly the kind of person I want in this community. So here is what I am going to ask. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell so YouTube actually puts these videos in front of you instead of burying them. And while you are at it, drop a comment below telling me the one fact from this video that surprised you the most so far. I read every single comment and it genuinely shapes the topics I cover next.
The central question the researchers wanted to resolve was deceptively straightforward.
Did modern humans emerge from one single unified ancestral population, exactly the way the textbooks described? Or did we emerge instead from several distinct groups loosely connected across Africa? The answer they uncovered was decisive, and it overturned the dominant theory. According to the genetic evidence, the earliest major split among human populations occurred somewhere between 120,000 and 135,000 years ago. That number alone is significant, but here is the detail that changes everything.
That number alone is significant, but here's the detail that changes everything.
Long before that split ever took place, there were already at least two and quite possibly more distinct human populations living in different regions. These groups were not completely isolated from one another, cut off by impassable barriers with zero contact for millennia.
Instead, they were engaged in a slow, complex dance of separation and reunion
that repeated itself over hundreds of thousands of years. They drifted apart when climate shifts or geographic changes pulled them away. They reconnected when conditions shifted again and brought neighboring groups back. They exchanged genes during those periods of reunion, then separated once more, then reunited again. This cycle continued for an almost incomprehensible span, before anything recognizable as modern Homo sapiens fully and finally emerged. The researchers gave this pattern a specific technical name: a weakly structured stem. Picture a tree in your mind, but instead of one thick, solid trunk rising straight up, imagine several thinner trunks growing side by side from the very beginning. These trunks twist loosely around one another, occasionally fusing together, occasionally pulling apart, creating a tangled, interconnected base before they separate. That tangled base is what the genetic data actually reveals about human ancestry. Not a single point of origin, but a sprawling network of roots weaving in and out of contact across a massive timescale. Humanity did not begin as a single seed planted in one perfect location. It began as several seeds scattered across a vast and wildly varied landscape, their roots slowly reaching toward each other underground for hundreds of thousands of years before anyone could have possibly noticed.
This new understanding has enormous implications that ripple outward.
One of the most significant is how it reshapes the theory of archaic introgression. This is the idea that early Homo sapiens interbred with a separate species, similar to how humans outside Africa carry traces of Neanderthal DNA. It was a perfectly reasonable hypothesis, but required a leap of faith. It required assuming the existence of an entire hidden human lineage that had never once been directly identified in the fossil record. A ghost species, essentially, inferred from statistical anomalies in DNA. The new research suggests that this ghost species might not be necessary at all. The unusual patterns can be explained by the internal structure of early populations. You do not need to invent a mysterious, unknown species quietly blending its DNA. You simply need to accept that early human populations were spread out across a massive continent, loosely separated by distance and shifting terrain. When those populations eventually merged more completely into a single species, the genetic differences that had accumulated would produce unusual variation. No phantom species required, no hidden branch of the family tree. Just the natural, predictable behavior of populations spread across a large landscape. I want to try something a little unconventional for this next moment. If this video has already taught you something, share it with exactly one person. Do not blast it to your entire feed. Pick one curious friend or coworker. Tell them to watch the first 5 minutes. That is all. Sometimes the most powerful way to spread knowledge is a single conversation. One of the lead researchers remarked that this model had never been properly tested. Nobody had previously built the statistical tools necessary to compare it directly. The cleaner story had been accepted by default, not because it had been proven. Once the comparison was made, the messier model consistently outperformed the old one. Now here is where this discovery reaches into territory you did not anticipate. It directly reshapes how scientists interpret physical fossils in museum collections. For years, paleontologists have been deeply puzzled by certain ancient remains. One of the most controversial examples is Homo naledi, discovered in South Africa. Homo naledi lived during a time period that overlaps directly with modern humans. Its bizarre combination of features led some to wonder if it was an ancestor. The new genetic model provides a fairly decisive answer to that question. According to the data, only about 1 to 4% of genetic differences trace back to variation between those early, loosely connected ancestral populations. That remarkably small number carries a critical implication for our history. Those early populations were still genetically similar enough that they looked alike. A fossil like Homo naledi almost certainly does not represent a contributing group. It was most likely a completely separate evolutionary lineage that existed alongside us. This insight fundamentally transforms how paleontologists approach every new discovery. Before this study, researchers relied largely on anatomical guesswork. Now they have a much clearer genetic framework to measure against. Difference in anatomy is now a warning sign pointing away from direct ancestry. This discovery slots into a larger pattern-building momentum for years. The past 2 decades of genetic research have been a series of humbling surprises. Nearly every time researchers extract usable DNA, old assumptions crumble. That is how we discovered that most people outside Africa carry Neanderthal DNA. And it is also how an entirely unknown branch, the Denisovans, was first identified. Not from a complete skeleton, but from a single tiny finger bone fragment. That single fragment revealed a new species no fossil hunter had identified. Denisovans interbred with ancestors, leaving behind traces that influence living people, including variants linked to high-altitude adaptation and infection responses. This new African origin study is fundamentally different from those earlier discoveries. Those earlier breakthroughs added new side branches to an established tree.
This study is challenging the shape of the trunk itself at the very beginning, from which every other branch of our evolutionary history eventually grows. Quick pause because we are entering the most important stretch of this video. Smash that like button so the algorithm shows this to other curious minds. Your single tap genuinely shapes who gets to learn this truth today. There is also a quietly important reason why this discovery took so long. The genetic history has been encoded in our DNA for hundreds of thousands of years. What changed is our technological ability to finally read it correctly. Sequencing a complete genome used to be an expensive multi-year undertaking. Today, scientists can sequence dozens of genomes as part of a single study. We finally built lenses sharp enough to read the fine print of our origins. And the story is far from finished, with new research piling on more depth. Scientists analyzing ancient genomes have found unbroken threads of ancestry. Other researchers have uncovered genetic variation that does not match living people. Each new dataset weaves another thread into an increasingly complicated tapestry. The story keeps growing more detailed rather than settling into simplicity. Researchers expect to gather data from many more underrepresented populations. Past genetic research leaned heavily on people of European ancestry. This left enormous blind spots in the very continent where humanity began. Every new population sequenced has the potential to reveal a hidden thread, refining the picture further and overturning parts of the settled science. So step back for a moment and really let the full weight of this sink in. The old story gave us a single point of origin, but it was wrong. The real story tells us being human was never about one group in one place. It was about connection across an enormous and geographically diverse continent. Multiple populations were occasionally separated but never truly cut off, always finding their way back into contact and always exchanging genes. Humanity did not begin as a single thread stretching back to a single point. It began as a web, loosely woven across an entire continent and slowly tightening, until it finally became the single deeply interconnected species we recognize today. Every person alive carries a small piece of that ancient tangled African web. You are the product of countless reunions between populations over deep time. The thing that made us human was connection, a tendency to reach across barriers. So here's the final question I want to leave burning in your mind. If the search for a single birthplace was wrong, what other stories are wrong? What other narratives are waiting to be dismantled by evidence we cannot yet read? Drop your thoughts in the comments because you start the best conversations. If you want more deep dives into hidden history, make sure you are subscribed. Science is nowhere close to finished rewriting the story of who we are. Every time a new chapter drops, we will be right here breaking it down together. The history of humanity is stranger, messier, and far more beautiful than the version you were ever taught in school or saw in museums. And we are only just beginning to read it.